Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. I hope that everybody can hear me, and welcome tonight to our talk that we're going to go through about what's hiding in your food. This talk is really something that I feel like for a number of different reasons is important. We have lots of different patients who are on different kinds of restricted menus and maybe different foods that for different food programs they're going to be following, but yet they don't really know what the major roadblocks are. So I thought we would just cover what's hiding in your food, just to give people kind of a rough idea as to what we need to avoid. A healthy outside starts with a healthy inside. I think this is absolutely key. We know that the gut is responsible for about 80% of our inflammation. It is the only thing that allows us to get nutrients into our system. It has serotonin receptors, which help regulate mood and how we think and how we feel. So the gut is just such a very, very important part of our body. It's one of the largest organ systems outside of our stomach, outside of our skin. And so we really need to take care of it. So again, I want to welcome everybody to our program tonight. We're going to talk about what's hiding in your food. I'm Dr. Melissa McRae at Vitality Natural Wellness. We have offices in Powell and Mansfield. And if you have any questions, there's the ability to raise your hand, I believe, from the chat function. So if you want to do that, we'll figure out a way. Kristen's here with me, so she's going to help me with those questions. So let's get started and figure out exactly what we need to do. There are foods that just don't agree with people. Many people say, I can't eat garlic, it really bothers me, or I can't eat tomatoes, it makes me sick. Or it just upsets your stomach. So we all know that there are things that just don't agree with us. It's very different, food sensitivities versus food allergies. So a sensitivity is when your body makes an immune response to certain foods, and it can even occur days after those foods are consumed. Then we have food allergies, and these would be like when people talk about a peanut allergy, for instance. This is a true anaphylactic or allergic reaction. Can cause difficulty breathing and digestive issues, skin rashes, but most importantly, it can be life-threatening. There are 8 major allergens that we look for, and those allergens typically are milk, egg, peanuts, tree nuts, wheat, soy, fish, and shell. Of course, we can have food sensitivities to anything. So the food allergies versus sensitivity is a difference. So why do we test food for sensitivities? This is key. We all know we have reactions. We all know that the gut is this key regulatory component of our body. It's an amazing organ. So the only way that we can really determine which foods are, or additives or ingredients are responsible for reactions is if we can test for them. So we're looking for immune reactions, not necessarily allergic, because most people will know if they have a true allergy to shellfish, for instance. Their tongue gets numb and their face swells up. So we're looking for immune reactions, most commonly dairy, wheat, eggs, yeast, pork, and soy. Those are really common. If somebody's going to do an elimination diet, they'll say, I really want to figure out what's going on with me. They can do an elimination diet. However, you might be sensitive to almonds and not cashews. So if you cut out all nuts and then bring back all nuts in, it can be extremely difficult to see what's causing the problem. Rotation diets can be implemented to address sensitivities. So if someone says, I don't really want to check because there's no way I'm going to avoid foods for the rest of my life, that's never the plan. The plan is to fix the underlying problem and then reintroduce those foods more of on a rotation setup so that your body doesn't continue to develop issues. So symptoms to consider, like who should get food sensitivity testing? People who have recurring abdominal pain, maybe gas and bloating after they eat, nausea and vomiting are common symptoms that will happen sporadically. Skin itchiness and redness, that's this indicator that there's an inflammatory process. Rashes like eczema, bronchitis and asthma, or just that kind of wheezy type of breathing. Joint pain and muscle stiffness, those are very, very common. People will oftentimes say even after they've eaten a meal, they can feel it in their hand and in their hand joints. Swelling, fatigue, and weakness. Fatigue is a big one that we see frequently, and excess sweating can even be an issue with food sensitivities. So what we see here at Vitality, a lot of times people have come to us with when they have a major issue happening. So From a digestive standpoint, we'll have a lot of patients with irritable bowel type symptoms, even things such as Crohn's and ulcerative colitis, reacting to different foods. Migraines, it's amazing what you can do through the diet. So again, we try to decrease the inflammation in the system, and many of these food products and enzymes and metabolites can trigger migraines. There's a great study in 2007, and when you have 43 out of 65 patients with migraines getting complete remission of a headache after removing reactive foods, I think that's pretty impressive, certainly compared to a lot of the prescription medications someone can be on instead. Mood issues, certainly we see behavioral changes in children with different foods. We see the same effects in adults, although maybe some control behaviors are kind of learned, hopefully, to compensate, but we see lots of mood issues and attention issues with food. Weight gain is another big one. So when you're eating an inflammatory food, something that's reacting negatively in your system, it creates a lot of inflammation. When that happens, your body will release ghrelin, and ghrelin is kind of one of those key words that are being tossed out right there. Ghrelin is an appetite stimulant. So not only are we retaining all this fluid from the inflammation, but we're also having an appetite stimulation at the same time. So we run into problems because you would think that you would know what's in your food, but I think we all can agree that we don't know what's in our food. There was this really interesting act passed, and it was passed in 2004, but it actually went into effect in 2006. And it talks about what has to be labeled and what does not have to be labeled. Certainly when you're worried about finding dairy and wheat and gluten, those are our biggies, soy, but then you have no idea if it's in some over-the-counter medications or prescriptions. Certainly we know it's in a lot of different cosmetic products. Any food that's regulated by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, like meat and poultry and even eggs, none of those have to be labeled if they contain anything else. And of course, liquors, there's restaurant foods. So there's many, many things that don't actually have to be labeled. So let's go through some of the key ones. And again, we're not going to cover every single food product. That would take us a long time. But just I wanted to touch on a few of the foods that we find most sensitivities to, and then some of the secret places where those are at. We're going to make this presentation available. So if you want to go back through and check out the slides or check out the video, you can, because there's going to be a lot of information in here. So we all know what an egg is. It's absolutely impossible to completely separate the yolk from the white. So if people have sensitivities to the yolk or the white, it is almost impossible to remove that. Egg whites are in a lot of different things. So imitation crab meat is probably one of the biggest surprises with that one. But it's in pretty much every form of imitation crab meat. When you're looking for some of the hidden sources, ovalbumin is one of the key words that it'll oftentimes go by, and lecithin. And you'll see lecithin in a lot of ingredients, and that's actually from egg white. Also watch out for whenever you see something as natural flavoring. Natural flavorings do not have to label what's in them, and egg whites and egg yolks are oftentimes in there. So if we look at actually the egg yolk, of course, it's the yellow part of the egg. Again, it's in a lot of different things. Of course, when we look at even baked goods and things like that, it'll be there. But it's interesting that you'll actually find egg in cholesterol-free egg substitutes. So if you think you're not getting egg, you definitely are. It's in egg beaters, and eggs are certainly, especially the whites, are one of the most common allergens we have. I wanted to put tuna in here. We see tuna sensitivities frequently, and I think people are eating a lot of tuna. It's easy, it's a go-to grab, and a lot of people are eating more of like a paleo type diet, so it's an easy travel-friendly type of food, but it's actually something that should really be limited. If you're looking at young children, they can get toxicity from the mercury and the BPA contents of the packaging that tuna comes in. Children under the age of 13, it's really recommended that they do not eat tuna because of the heavy metal content. If you are going to eat tuna, make sure it's more of the chunk light or the skipjack. It's a very high level of histamine food, so if somebody is sensitive to it, they're going to have even more marked reactions because it releases all that histamine, which triggers flushing and even palpitations, skin turning red, and itchiness. So I just wanted to put a little blip in here about this high mercury heavy metal fish to avoid. It's a good reference to look back to. It's not so much a food sensitivity issue, but certainly when we're looking for things that are hidden in our food, heavy metals is becoming a greater and greater issue. And when you look at the best fish to eat, when you're down to choices like sardines and anchovies as the top 5, I think we've got some problems. So finding good fish sources and healthy fish sources is becoming more of a problem. So let's get back into some of those food sensitivity categories. Let's move on to some dairy. Casomorphin is a reaction that we see very frequently, and it's actually from the digestion of the milk protein casein. So there's casein and whey. Those are the 2 main proteins in milk. Casein is the major one. Casomorphin is actually very interesting. When it's digested and we get these casomorphin proteins, they actually bind to the opiate receptor. So this is actually the protein component that people, when they say they're addicted to cheese, they actually, 1 serving of cheese will produce 1/10 the effect of an opiate dose. So it is very interesting what people respond to. It's known to actually increase the mucus production, so we would talk about cutting out dairy for thick mucus. It goes by a lot of different names. So some of the lactalbumin, the lactose, lactoglobulin. There's rennet, and rennet is actually an enzyme that's used to regulate cheese. It's obviously found in all of our dairy, chewing gum, creamers. Mashed potatoes is a really interesting one. We'll typically find that also in even the powdered potatoes. It's okay. I'll try this one right there. Okay.
Okay, I think we're good.
All right, we were getting a little bit of background noise, so we're just gonna make that one stop. Okay, so again, rennet is more of an enzyme that's found when they use to coagulate the cheese. There's a couple different things to know. Lactoferrin and tagatose, those are actually milk derivatives, and those are usually okay in people with milk allergies. So if you see those are typically going to be okay. Again, some of the hidden sources, fat replacements, which is interesting, that's Simpless. I've seen that on a lot of different ingredients. It's actually a dairy product. And then there is milk in rice cheese and most soy cheese. Maybe we'll go to the next one. Okay, so next let's talk about goat milk. Occasionally we see some questions about, or we see some sensitivities to goat milk, but most of the time it's more of an alternative we're looking for than dairy, so than cow's milk. So I wanted to just cover that. It has more of the short chain and medium chain fatty acids than cow's milk, and so it's easier to digest, and our body's lipase can break that down. The other thing is it doesn't have as much of gluten in it, so the fat doesn't form in clusters, and so our body just processes it easier. Goat milk can be found in a lot of different things. Kefir and yogurt are probably the biggest one. Anything you can make from regular cow's milk, you can make from goat milk, and a lot of people who can't digest regular cow dairy do very well with goat milk. We'll talk about whey protein next. This is kind of the buddy to casein that we talked about before, so there's casein and whey. Whey is 20% of the protein in milk. Casein, again, is sort of more of what we would consider the bad one. Whey is something bodybuilders tend to like quite a bit. Some interesting sources, you'll find it in instant hot tea and instant coffee. You'll find it in latex items and nail polish. So in your sensitivity testing, if it comes out with whey and you think, oh, I'll just avoid dairy, you actually have to still kind of dig in and see where you're getting some whey. GI issues are a lot worse because of the lactose in whey. So if somebody is not only lactose intolerant but has a sensitivity to whey, they really have quite a big double whammy. When somebody's consuming too much whey, they're setting themselves up to eventually likely develop a sensitivity just because it's so protein laden. And then here's wheat and gluten. Now we could actually spend an entire topic, an entire conversation just about wheat and gluten. It's a huge topic and one of quite a bit of concern. 1 in 7 Americans suffer from some type of wheat or gluten sensitivity. It's not that everybody has celiac, but if you were to remove gluten from your diet, I would say roughly 90 to 95% of people would say they really feel better. So wheat and gluten. So glutens are groups of proteins that are found in wheat, found in a couple of the different grains, and it really acts like the glue to hold things together. You'll find it in mostly breads and baked goods, granola bars, pastas. It's in lots and lots of sweets. You'll find it in spaghetti sauce. You'll find gluten in many different things. What we get very concerned about is when you have a sensitivity to this, your body will actually start to develop these antibodies to multiple different proteins, some of which are called transglutamases. The problem with that is not only do you have transglutamase in your gut lining, but you also have them in your heart, in your lungs, even your brain. So if your body is creating antibodies to attack this because of gluten exposure, it will attack it anywhere it sees it. We see a higher risk of dementia and memory loss and brain fog in people who are producing those antibodies. So if anybody's ever heard of the book Grain Brain, that's part of the science behind what is actually happening to cause that. So some gluten-free grains and starches. I just wanted everybody to have access to a list where you could see what were some of the safe grains and starches if you have a sensitivity to gluten. A lot of the things you'll find on there, nut flours are becoming easier to access, which is fantastic. You'll see corn on there. Corn is typically a gluten-free grain, although we're going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute as well. So let's move on to oats. Oats are another common one that we'll see some sensitivities to. It's naturally gluten, it naturally has some gluten in it. There are some varieties of oats that do come gluten-free, so you'll have to look for those. There's also cross-contamination in processing facilities, so just be careful. If you do find a gluten-free oats, check to see, because it will typically say processed in a facility that has gluten. So make sure you're looking for the ones that don't. Flour mixes, some alcoholic beverages have oats in it, cereals and granolas. Oats is actually a thickener that sometimes will get put into supplements and capsules as a filler. So finding those hidden ingredients is really important. Sometimes you'll have to actually go to the site of the manufacturer of the supplements to see what fillers they actually use, because they don't have to label what those fillers are. We come to corn. Corn is actually a grain. Some people think it's just a vegetable category, but it's really a grain. Fascinating the things that they can put corn into. So, of course, anything that has corn syrup in it is going to be fair game for corn. Sweets, candy, soft drinks, a lot of our typicals we think about. One thing that's really interesting you'll find is caramel coloring. So any type of beverage that is caramel colored, any type of soda, if it has caramel coloring, it's corn. Baking powder has corn. Vitamin C supplements, there's two different forms. 80% of vitamin C supplements are corn derivatives. Honey, if you're not getting 100% pure honey, they found that 85% of honeys in the store actually are diluted down with corn syrup. Powdered sugar, if you look on that, you'll see it contains cornstarch. Vanilla extract has corn, and xylitol also comes from corn. So we're starting to see some more options for non-GMO corn. We think that that's probably related to some of the issues that we're seeing, is it's just a little bit different, but it also is able to tolerate the higher pesticide levels. So unfortunately, when we see 90% of the corn grown in the U.S. is GMO, that can create some problems. Corn is really fascinating if you're looking at chickens that are fed a corn diet versus being able to eat more insects and free-range poultry. There's a ratio of omega-3 to omega-6 fatty acids, and the omega-3s are very anti-inflammatory, so we like those. 6s it's important to have the appropriate ratio, but 6s tend to be more inflammatory. Well, feeding chickens a corn-based diet, they will have a ratio of approximately 1 to 20. When if you have a pastured chicken or it's able to kind of free range, that ratio is naturally going to be about 1 to 2 or 1 to 4. So when you have those inflammatory fatty acids 20 times higher than normal just by eating a diet of corn, we can start to see how that impacts what's in our food. If somebody has a strong corn sensitivity, we do tell them to avoid eggs. So legumes, we'll talk about that. Peanut's actually a legume, although a lot of people think about it as a nut. It's in many, many different things. Peanut flours are oftentimes used in soup as thickeners. So even though it won't necessarily say peanuts on the label, it should say on the bottom of the packaging, not peanut free or not nut free. So some of the things you'll find it in is imitation almonds, which are interesting, really peanuts, chili. There's, of course, egg rolls. The different wrappers will have peanut flour in it. Some of the vegetarian meat products like TVP often use nuts in it. It's one of the top 8 common allergens, and it's also a big source of lectins. And so we're going to have a talk about lectins sometime, not tonight, but lectins are one of those commonly problematic digestive insiders, I guess you would say. So we don't necessarily like high doses of lectins. Let me talk about the soybean. We will see soy reactions frequently. Now, not everybody has all of these at one time, but certainly we do enough food sensitivity testing that we see these things pop out. Soybean it's a bean. It can be very useful. We have to make sure that it's not, that it's more of a food grade. And we look at the organic versus not organic and the pesticides and things. So keep that in mind. But soybeans, commonly found, you'll see the list there. Soy sauce is a big one. Chocolate, mayonnaise, anything that uses soybean oil, think of it in that regard. Also things like that TVP or the vegetable proteins, the meat substitutes that people will use. It's in a lot of processed foods, and if it says natural flavoring, it very likely has soy in it. Again, they don't have to label what the ingredients are in natural flavoring. So if you see natural flavoring, just assume there's definitely soy in there. Soy we worry about because it can cause thyroid issues. It's also very high in phytoestrogens. A lot of people think that if they choose the sprouted soy, they're doing better. In early young sprouted soy does have a higher protein content, but it actually still has the same density of phytoestrogens and thyroid disruptors. The safest bet for soy, if you're going to use it, is actually fermented soy. And when you look at different Asian cultures, they're eating fermented soy. They're not eating the processed soy that we are in our tofu and all of the other types of products that we eat. So if you're going to eat soy, try to choose a fermented soy, and that should keep you, that should really keep you out of harm's way if you're eating a lot of it. So white potato, we threw this one on here because when we have people eating more of an anti-inflammatory diet, we do have them avoid white potato for a period of time. Again, our goal is always to reintroduce things when we have the gut healed, but white potato is one of those commonly inflammatory and food sensitive food ingredients that we have. You'll see where it's commonly found. Interesting that they'll put potato starches and frozen pies and desserts, so that's what we're looking at there. Some of the hidden sources, different names you'll see. Dextrose comes mostly from potatoes. Vitamin A palmitate. You see iodized salt actually has potato flakes in it. All low-fat, skim milk, and milk alternatives, not mild milk alternatives, they do have components of potato in it. It's a nightshade, so it's typically inflammatory, and that's why we think people have reactions to this. Nightshades, again, is another topic of discussion, but it's more inflammatory. It looks like my last slides disappeared, but so those are some of the main things we look for. I just wanted to review, when we talk about food sensitivity testing, what exactly is it? What we look for is, it's a blood test that we do. There's several different companies out there that do it. We work with 2 companies in particular that are specialty labs that will send the blood test off for us. So you come into the office, we draw your blood, and we process it. Sometimes it needs to be spun, sometimes frozen, and then we'll send it off to the specialty lab. One lab in particular processes 250 different food items, both raw and cooked, and they're looking for the different enzymes. that your body will react to. The other company does about 125 different components. There's a significant cost difference between the two, so it really depends on what someone's symptoms are, like how which testing we would recommend at the beginning. This one in particular is called Vibrant Labs, and it's a food sensitivity testing. You'll see the how the results actually come through is we'll see severe reactions, mild reactions, and moderate reactions, and then we'll see foods that are all considered okay. When we find those severe reactions or moderate reactions, we know exactly how long we need to withdraw that from the diet. We also can counsel you on where are some of the hidden sources and what you're going to find. And then we also let you know how we can start reintroducing those items so that you can get them back in your diet. One of the biggest problems we see with getting food sensitivities is actually intestinal permeability. We did do a webinar about that, so you can go check that out on our YouTube page. When you're eating foods that are inflammatory, what's happening is as your body breaks those down, if your gut lining is inflamed, those enzymes and food nutrients pass through the gut wall before they're supposed to. When that happens, your body will see that as foreign, and it'll create an immune reaction. We're actually measuring the IgG and IgM levels of your body's antibody response to these foods. So that's a condition we oftentimes refer to as leaky gut. And what we do is we heal that gut lining, we remove the inflammatory foods, and then we begin to reintroduce things. So the blood test is very simple, and we do quite a few of those so we can figure out exactly what's causing the problem. So what should you do with this information? One, I hope it was helpful to see that there are some hidden things in our foods, and just know to dig a little bit deeper. There's a website that I referred to on one of the earlier screens. Again, we'll make that available to everybody, that you can search for the different foods, and it'll tell you common other names that they're often I guess named after. So we'll make that available to you all. And if you think you have some of the symptoms, migraines, bowel issues, bloating, gassiness, just not feeling well after certain foods, maybe you've tried to sort some things out and just feel like you're kind of your wits end to what's going on, or you have a rash that just won't go away, the food sensitivity testing might be an option for you. So you can always call the office, let us know, and we can kind of walk you through if we think that's appropriate or not, or what the next best step would be. So if you have any questions, please feel free to either type them in, or you can let us know, and we'll wait a couple minutes and go from there. Okay, so somebody had asked about diet sodas. So sucralose is going to be one of those key components that we really do not like. It's going to be a breakdown product sometimes of the different starches. Then we also have to worry about the caramel coloring, as also being some additives in there. We really, I don't like sodas in general. I don't like diet sodas more just because of all the artificial ingredients that we use in there. There's rarely an artificial sweetener that the body is going to respond well to. So in general, we try to avoid that. Also the carbonation, the pH balance that it causes changes within your system, the damage to enamel. There's this really, really cool study about Mountain Dew, and I know this is not a diet soda, but it's along the same lines. There was a gentleman who was suing PepsiCo because he said he found a dead mouse in his Mountain Dew. And so they looked at the date of the can that the Mountain Dew, or the bottle that the Mountain Dew said it was packaged on, and it did not even go to court. And the reason why is they knew that if there was a dead mouse in a bottle of Mountain Dew for 30 days or more, it would have been completely disintegrated in a gelatinous blob at the bottom. So it's amazing what these things can do, and yet we really have to worry about what our insides are doing when it has repeat exposure. So not a big diet soda fan. The other, what's the other question? Alternative bread options. That's a great one. You know, it's interesting. You can do some cool things, like if you're making pancakes, there's banana pancakes. There's a lot of different ways to make that sort of thing. There's a lot of different ways to make some dessert sweets with nut flours. As far as a bread substitute, that does get pretty tricky. You can find some gluten-free breads. There's Edie's has some good ones. There are the main one I'm thinking of, Ezekiel breads. Ezekiel bread has a couple of gluten-free breads. When you're avoiding grains in particular, it's pretty hard to do bread. But if you're just cutting out gluten, there are some good ones. Ezekiel and Udi's are probably, I think, two of the better ones. They are going to be a denser bread. They are going to have more of like that nutty kind of seedy texture. If you want to ask a question, there's a little hand that I believe will pop up. All right, so we will go ahead and put this out. It'll be available on our Facebook page and on our website. 24 hours? YouTube, yeah. On YouTube in the next 24 hours. So if you want to go back through and review some of the information, certainly feel free to do that. Hopefully you've got some good information tonight. Again, I'm Dr. Melissa McRae, and we're at Vitality Natural Wellness. I hope everybody has a great night.